In the previous video, we checked out that the 9970X, which has double the cores of the 9950X. This is 16, this is 32 cores. And I said that this 32 core one is the last nail on Intel's coffin. But here's the thing, this is not even the best CPU that there is. AMD's latest and greatest right now is this, the 9980X, which has double the cores of the 9970X. We're talking about 64 cores, 128 threads, the absolute behemoth. But what exactly has changed from the previous generation? Is it worth upgrading double the cores from 32 to 64? And how would it actually compare to some of the Intel and AMD's consumer cheap offerings like the 9950X and the 285K? If you're a creator, you're going to be excited about that, because if you wanted to, you can kind of tickle that CPU and see, okay, how much power can you draw? Can we overclock you? And then see it pull over 730 watts. It's so annoying. I don't want to pay hundreds of dollars to just change my Windows wallpaper just because my Windows isn't licensed. Well, why don't you try Hookeys? That's a ton cheaper. And if you use the code TN20, you get it even cheaper. What do you mean? How do I get it and how is it possible? Well, see this video here, or the one you're watching. Click in the link on the video description, add the Windows 11 CD product to the cart, proceed to checkout, add the code TN20 for the extra discount. So what, the Windows 11 Pro OEM key is just $23.22? Yeah. Choose the preferred payment option and complete the purchase. The key will be available on the purchased orders in a few moments. Copy the key and paste it into your Windows activation settings, and you're all done. Oh, that was easy. Is that Ryan Gosling? No. Anyway, by the way, the same discount code also works website-wide, so go check out other products, maybe like Microsoft Office. Now, bear in mind, this is Threadripper. There is also Threadripper Pro that AMD has launched, and there is a difference in platform where we've got the Pro and non-Pro kind of platforms. If you want to know the difference, I talked about it in the last video. Go check out that one so I don't have to repeat myself. I do want to look into the specs because it is slightly different now, because now we've got 64 cores. What exactly has changed and how does it compare to the 34 cores? What's under the hood? So what you can see here is 285K. This is just an Intel mainstream platform. Then we've got the 7980X, 9980X, and 9970X. The 7980X obviously is previous generation, and then the 9000 Threadrippers are the new generation. From the previous generation, the core count is exactly the same. The max turbo frequency has gone from 5.1 to 5.4 gigahertz, which is exactly the same as on the 9970X. The base frequency is exactly the same as on the previous generation, but slightly lower than the 70X. And that's completely normal, because the bigger the core count is, the base core clock will go down naturally. That's just how CPU architecture works. There's no E cores. Every single one of those cores is a P core, which means 2 cores per thread, and P meaning performance core. There's no less of a performance cores. We've got PCI generation 5, and we've got 80 lanes, which is an upgrade from the 7000 series. In fact, quite a considerable upgrade from 48 lanes to 80 lanes. As you can see, the Threadripper platform previous generation doubles the bandwidth compared to Intel 285K, and by that I mean the PCI lanes, 24 to 48, but now even more, 80 PCI lanes. But the Pro CPUs, so if you're looking at the 9980WX, which means workstation basically, then we have 128 lanes, which is even more. But more about that in the previous video, go check out that one. In terms of memory channels, exactly the same, 4, and when looking at the memory speed, it has increased quite a bit from the previous generation, from 5200 to 6400 mega transfers per second. The cache is exactly the same as the previous generation, as well as the power draw, even though the node that AMD is using is actually a little bit less. So perhaps they have put more transistors into this package, and that's why they're able to offer you more PCIe lanes. But at the same time, the Threadripper ones could be a cut down versions of the Threadripper Pro versions that just didn't kind of make it. I don't know that. I'm just speculating. Now, for the test bench setup, I'm using the Asus TRX 50 Pro workstation motherboard. We're using 128 gigabytes of RAM from G.Skill that is running at 6400 megahertz. For SSD, we're using 2 terabyte Samsung 9100 Pro SSD, and for the GPU we're using RTX 4090 ROG Matrix from Asus and a Silverstone 360mm AIO cooler. Now let's take a look at the benchmarks, and here we're comparing the Threadripper 9980x, which is going to be our baseline for all the other CPUs, then Intel Core Ultra 285K with the boost profile enabled, then 9950X mainstream, and then the 9970X in the end. So we can really see if from 32 to 64 core switch is worth it. So in Cinebench R24, we can see that the 285K is about 15-16% faster in single core score, but 62.7 or 8% slower in the multi-core scores. We're more than double the performance on the 9980X. And then the 9950X is about 66% slower in the multi-core scores and about 6% faster in the single core scores. So interestingly, we're not losing that much performance compared to the 9950X, and the single core performance is exactly the same on the 9970X compared to the 9980X. So from 32 to 64 core, interestingly, we're not losing any single core performance. It is 36.8% slower in the multi-core scores compared to the 9980X. Moving on to Geekbench 6, the 285K is 10.7% faster in the single core scores, but about 20% slower in the multi-core scores. 9950X is about 13% faster in the single core scores, which is bigger increase compared to the Cinebench R24, and about 28% slower in the multi-core scores. The 9970X is 2.7% faster in the single core scores, interestingly, and about 2.7% slower in the multi-core scores. So interestingly here, Geekbench 6 can't take full advantage of all of the threads that we have available on the Threadripper because it's testing more general things that the CPU does. Opening documents, closing documents, unzipping, zipping, deblurring, rendering, encoding, lots of little things that the CPU can do. So it's a very, very general CPU test rather than just rendering. The threads can't always be utilized, so that's why we don't see the scaling just quite like that. But let's have a look at some of the AI benchmarks. So Onyx AI, the 285K boost is interestingly 22 to 51% faster, depending if you're looking at the single half or quantized scores. The 9950X is a lot faster in the single and quantized scores. Again, I do think there's some kind of error on the half, but whenever I'm testing the 9950X on the half, it just gets 9999. I think it's an error. The Threadripper 9970X is interestingly about 25 to 40% faster in the single half and quantized scores, which is interesting. Perhaps we can't utilize all the power on there, and then some of the cores just come as baggage rather than just pure power and speed. The OpenVINO benchmark here, again, doesn't look as impressive as the 9970X. So it looks like the 32 core is a really, really nice sweet spot there where we do have a big performance boost, and then the 64 core just isn't as good. You can see the 285K is faster apart from the half, 9950X is faster, and the 9970X is the fastest in this bunch. At the same time, I do want to mention a huge thing in here. These benchmarks are just like one selected thing how this works. This 9980X actually offers you a lot of other things. So if you want to create an LLM kind of a machine at home and running them locally, the capabilities for this Threadripper are far beyond any of the other ones, because you can either have virtual machines, have multiple different systems running on there, because you can basically have two Threadripper 9970X systems running with a lot of PCI lanes, GPUs. You can install a ton of stuff in there. So there is huge benefit of going with the 64 core rather than the 285K from Intel or the 9950X from AMD, for example. Let's take a look at actually some applications like photo editing. We've got two applications, Photoshop and Lightroom, coming up in a minute. The 9980X is actually not impressive in Photoshop. Those 64 cores aren't a benefit, but rather a burden that really can't be utilized. You can see 285K is about 15.8% faster, 9950X 32% faster, and the 32 core about 10.7% faster. So I can see how the 32 core is actually a bit of a better sweet spot. Moving on to Lightroom Classic, we can see a very similar thing. The 285K is 89% faster. We're getting almost double the performance with the Intel Core Ultra. So the sweet spot massively in terms of price and performance is there for Intel side. Then we've got 9950X 50% faster, and then the 9970X 41% faster, which is actually a huge performance increase. So I don't think Lightroom Classic here, again, isn't the best option for the Threadripper. Bear in mind, there are a few different workloads where this might actually be helpful. If you're doing a lot of merging of photos, exporting of photos, or importing of photos, then the Threadripper multi-core performance might be worth it for you. But I think that's very selected amount of you. Let me know if you're one of them. Moving on to Premiere Pro, and interestingly, the 285K is slower, 5 to 6% slower, and we've always seen Intel perform better with the QuickSync. Apparently, not anymore. The 9950X is 13 to 18.5% slower, so it is slower, interestingly. And when looking at the 32 core version, then this Threadripper 9980X is the fastest CPU I have tested for Premiere Pro, which is ridiculous. We can see about 1% slower in the extended overall scores, the 9970X, and about 2% slower in the standard overall scores. So it is truly a beast, and the 64 cores are just chewing and shredding through all the codecs and just giving you the absolute best performance. Bear in mind, I'm testing it with a 1490. If you had a 5090, you might see even bigger of an increase, perhaps in some of the cases, because the Intel Core Ultra 285K wouldn't have a benefit of having certain codecs accelerated on the QuickSync, because now the NVIDIA RTX 5000 series offer even more codec support and better and faster support than Intel QuickSync. So that's impressive. Looking at After Effects, I've got the 285K here with the 9970X. And interestingly, the 9970X 32 core is quite a bit slower here, about 16 to 12, 13% slower in the standard and extended overall scores. And the 3D extended score is actually 34% slower, so quite a bit faster. But at the same time, we're not still matching the 285K. Interestingly, whether Intel's architecture or the faster single core performance just works a little bit better for After Effects. Even though we have quite a bit more RAM, the 285K has only 48 gigabytes, but perhaps the faster RAM makes a difference at 8000 megahertz. I'm not sure. If you're looking at Threadripper systems, then you can see that the 64 core is about 12 to 16% faster. And now DaVinci Resolve Studio. 285K is slower here, and the 9950X is even slower. But interestingly, the 32 core is slightly faster. Just within margin of error faster. I mean, you could argue that they perform exactly the same because it's within a couple of percent, but at the same time, when measuring an average of multiple tests, I can see the 9970X slightly faster, which just shows me that the 64 core architecture or the core count isn't quite exactly worth what we think in DaVinci Resolve. So AI is about 4.7% slower, but at the same time, I don't think it's worth the price bump because there's a huge price difference between the 32 to 64. I'm sure you've been waiting for this moment because you're thinking, the Threadripper is not meant for photo or video editing, apart from maybe Premiere Pro, that it is faster, but it's meant for rendering and CPU power, so how much better is it? Looking at Blender and 3D rendering here, we can see that the 285K is more than 3 times slower. The 9980X is a whole other level, which is absolutely ridiculous. The Threadripper 9970X is 42% slower, pretty much exactly in monster, junk shop, and classroom scenes, which means that we're getting quite a good scaling from 32 to 64 cores. It's not exactly that, but there is PBO that you can enable, which we're going to talk about in a minute, which will show you that you can get even more performance. But the rendering performance is absolutely crazy. As you can see, the 9950X again is more than 3 times slower. The monster scene gets almost 1000 points score, whereas the 285K and 9950X can't even clip the 300 mark, which is absolutely impressive. And V-Ray now, another 3D application, we can see that the 285K is more than 3 times slower, 69.3% slower. 9950X is 67.9% slower, more than 3 times again. And the 9970X is about 38% slower. So the scaling in V-Ray isn't as good as in Blender, but it's still very, very impressive. And when talking about the power draw, the 9980X pulls 350 watts like I mentioned earlier, and it's exactly the same as the previous generation, and it's exactly the same power draw as the 32 core variant, which is interesting because the 9980X has 64 cores, double the cores, but exactly the same power draw, which means that the power efficiency per core is out of this world, is absolutely insane compared to Intel, compared to AMD's own 32 core variant. It's ridiculous. Here's the thing, there's also a 96 core Threadripper Pro version available that also pulls exactly the same amount, which just is absolutely crazy. These CPUs, both of the Threadrippers and the previous generation, can be overclocked, which means there's some performance on the table that AMD says, try it, have a go if you wanted to. But the way I test it as a creator, I think the best way is to just enable PBO and then see what the motherboard's gonna do. So when enabling the PBO, I can see different kind of things happening depending which application I'm using. In Cinebench R24, I'm seeing 500 and something watts pulled, not as much as in V-Ray. In V-Ray, sometimes we are peaking over 730 watts pulled in there. So depending on your workload, it might pull a lot more power. So what about the actual performance difference? When enabling PBO, we can see that in V-Ray CPU benchmark, we're clipping over 115,000 points. That is 16.7% increase compared to the stock. But at the same time, we're pulling roughly twice the power. So the power efficiency absolutely tanks. But if that isn't a thing for you and someone else is paying for your electricity bills, then there is extra performance in store. The Cinebench R24, when enabling PBO, we're getting over 7,000 points, and that is 5.8% faster compared to the stock. So even at that, we're getting a performance increase. So I would say that when enabling PBO, we can look at between 5 to 15% roughly maximum increase of CPU. And that is especially evident when doing a lot of 3D rendering or putting together where the multi-core enhancement of the CPU can be utilized. If you've got a mixed workload, single thread and multi-threaded, you're probably not going to see that performance increase, especially in video editing, for example, or photo editing. If you're looking at Threadripper platform, you probably knew the pricing already. Go check it out in the video description below if you want to check it out. Or if you want more bang for buck version, there's some build guides in the video description below that you can just buy for a fraction of the price of that CPU and get the whole computer system. If you're into that, go check it out. Now, one of the other things that I'm interested in is we have tested just the latest with the latest kind of consumer platform. But what about the previous 7,000 Threadripper CPUs? How much have we increased? But I also have the 5,000 series AMD Threadrippers. So what about people who are still running the 5,000 series Threadrippers? How much of a performance increase are we getting from there? Well, we are going to have to check that out. If you're into that, comment below. Let me know what you think. Subscribe if you haven't already. I'll see you in the next video. Thanks guys for watching. God bless. Bye-bye.